There are hidden places in Israel that you need to see. And here to talk about those places in person, Aaron Lipkin, and to his left, Daniel Wright. Guys, it's a pleasure to have you here at Prophecy Watchers.
Shalom.
Thank you.
Shalom.
We just start out and say that most of you know Avi Lipkin. For years you've seen him with us, and this is his son. And it's great to have you here.
Thank you.
Aaron Lipkin is an expert at Israeli geographical and historical places. And by the way, he has put together, in conjunction with Daniel Wright, 3 DVDs. And we're going to talk about the first 2 of them on this program, and then on a second program we'll be talking about the third. Daniel, you are our artist in residence here at Prophecy Watchers. You design our magazine and do layout work, but you're also very much interested in the hidden places, the really important places in prophetic Israel, right?
That's true. I really, I met Aaron back in 2012 through knowing his father. And what was really interesting after I got to know him personally, I realized, oh my goodness, he's a tour director. And so he specializes in sites and locations that are east of the Green Line. Obviously, if you go with him, you can see the entire country, but there are areas east of the Green Line and what the world calls the West Bank, where the lion's share of Bible activity in the Old and New Testament happened in this heartland. And I just find it fascinating because it validates the Bible. And a lot of Christians don't go to these places.
That's true, and we had the pleasure in March of 2015 when we made a tour of hearing you lecture on a couple of places. One of them, Bethel, just a little north of Jerusalem, and you lectured, stood there on a rather chilly morning, but it warmed up, and lectured us on the historical importance of this place called Bethel. And it blew me away. And then, of course, here on this DVD, which is entitled The Gate of Heaven, you have encapsulated all the truths about this geographical location. Most people simply don't make the connection in their minds between the Bible and geography in Israel. And that really helped me to do that. It almost goes beyond your imagination to think that the patriarchs of the Bible stood in those places and talked to God and made promises and made covenants. Tell us about that just a little bit. How did you begin to be interested in these things?
Well, I've been in tourism for many years, and especially educational tourism with young Jews that we would bring from the United States in order to strengthen their Jewish identity, their connection to the Bible. And I haven't visited Judea and Samaria at all. We were always touring other parts of Israel. And in the last 5 years, living in the Shomron, in Samaria, suddenly I found out where I was living, and it was amazing. The Bible happened in Judea and Samaria. It happened in the biblical heartland of Israel. And all these amazing sites that we read about in the Bible, Hebron, Bethel, Shiloh, the story of the blessings and the curses between Mount Gerizim and Mount Ebal, all of these stories happened in where I live, in my area. And when I drive to Jerusalem from my house, now knowing where these places were, I say, wait a second, this is where Jacob dreamt the dream of the ladder. This is where Elisha brought the bears from the forest. This is where Jonathan fought the Philistines. And this is just, a half an hour drive from where I live to Jerusalem. It's just such a privilege to live in Israel.
Well, I'm going to read just a short passage from my Bible, and I want you to comment on it because God spoke with Abram. Genesis 13:14. The Lord said to Abram after Lot was separated from him, Lift up now thine eyes and look from the place where thou art, northward, southward, eastward, and westward, for all the land that thou seest, to thee will I give it, and to thy seed forever. So there is a spot in Israel where Abram stood before he became Abraham, and God said, look in all directions from this spot, and I'm going to give you everything you see. Well, that's amazing. And we went to Bethel, and then you showed us around this spot, and then to the north where there is a mountain. Tell us all about that. Where did Abraham stand?
Well, for generations, when we read this part in the Bible, it said that Abraham was in the area of Bethel. But there was no specific location where exactly Abraham stood when God revealed himself to him and promised him the land. And the fascinating thing about living in Israel is that you have all the time archaeological discoveries that really strengthen the Bible and bring it, show it in a different light. And you obviously heard of the Dead Sea Scrolls that were found in the 1940s and 50s. And so one of the scrolls that was found there is a very interesting scroll. It's called the External Scroll of Genesis. And what it is it's basically the private diary of Abraham in the Aramaic language. And so if the Bible doesn't say exactly where Abraham stood while receiving that prophecy from God of the promise of the land, when you go to the external scroll of Genesis, you read in Abraham's diary that Abraham says that God tells him to go to a certain place called Ramat Chatzor, which is the highest mountain right by where we stood. And it says in the diary that Abraham goes up to that mountain and he stands there and God says, you see all the land around you. This is the land that I'm going to give you. And when you stand there at Bethel and you see that mountain, you see the physical place. You can imagine, you can really literally imagine Abraham standing on that mountain and receiving that promise from God. For me, as a Jew living in Israel today, is so exciting.
And I will never forget that morning when Aaron went through a whole list of historical events that took place at this spot, Bethel. And I'll never forget looking to the north where it's a kind of a long east-westerly situated mountain that is 3,000 or 4,000 feet above the terrain, probably. And of course, we didn't go up there. Tell us why we didn't go up there.
Well, parts of it are military areas that you cannot go. There's a big Air Force base on the top of it. And parts of it are, you need a special permission to get there if you want to visit. And I actually visited that place 2 years ago. And when I stood there, I literally saw the whole land.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's got to be amazing. But
is.
I find it kind of interesting that the military has a position located there where they can see north, south, east, and west. In other words, they can see everything.
Yes. I think it's a historical irony that 4,000 years after Abraham stood on that mountain and God showed him the whole land, that his descendants 4,000 years later decide to establish an army base that is looking over the land, just like Abraham, making sure that everything is good, that there's no airplanes coming in without any permission, just like Abraham.
Now, Daniel was there with us. And what are some of your recollections of that day and that place? Bethel, the gate of heaven.
Well, I do remember the temperature was quite low. It's also interesting, and I didn't know this before that day, there's an oak tree, which also makes a brief showing in the video, that's at least 1,000 years old. And in the Turkish period, the Ottoman Turkish period, about 400-year segment of time, a lot of the trees in the country were denuded. They're cut down. I think you could have been taxed if you had them on your private property. And so a lot of trees were gone. But these old trees have lasted from way before the Ottoman Turkish period. And they always are preserved in these various places across the country where they're considered to be sacred or holy places. So it's kind of right where Aaron was giving his teaching. I mean, we were in the shadow of a 1,000-year-old oak tree. In fact, it has a fence around it to protect it. It's got a little bit of armature because it's quite old. So I was just struck by how old it is and how the people even long before the founding of the nation of Israel. The people felt it was important to preserve these sites, and they used the trees to do that.
Why is this DVD named The Gate of Heaven? Bethel, the Gate of Heaven. How did you arrive at that?
Well, this site that Daniel just spoke about, it's a very special site because, first of all, it's nowhere. It's out of any village or ancient village around. It's a barren hill that has a church. It has a mosque. It has a huge cemetery from 2,000 years ago. And this place is a big mystery, is a big puzzle. And the DVD that you're talking about, The Gate of Heaven, speaks about why people chose to be buried there. Why did Christians and Muslims build houses of prayer there, which is, again, nowhere? What is the importance of this place, this biblical importance? And in that DVD, I speak about the importance of the story of Jacob's dream of the ladder in the Bible, and how that affected other stories in the Bible, in the book of Judges and in the book of Kings, why people chose Bethel always as a sacred place. And it all goes back to Jacob's dream of the ladder. And you recall when Jacob wakes up after the dream, he says, "This is no other than the house of God. This is the gate of heaven."
Wow.
So that's the name that I chose.
That's the title.
Yeah.
And you can actually go to that place, you can stand there, and you see a lot of different things. The tree that Daniel described. I guess the reason all the trees were cut down, I heard at least, is because the Ottoman Empire imposed a tree tax, and if you cut down trees, you wouldn't have to pay tax, right?
On private property.
On private property. So anti-tree. But that tree survived in this place, and that makes this place very interesting. There are other little archaeological facets in this spot that you pointed out.
Yes.
Talk about some of those.
Well, like I mentioned, there is a church from the Crusader period, adjacent to a mosque from the early Arab period. We're talking about times in history that are, 1,000 years ago to 1,500 years ago. But the really interesting thing is that there is a huge cemetery from the Second Temple period and from the First Temple period. For some reason, Jews chose to be buried on that barren hill, away from Bethel, the ancient Bethel, because they believed that place had an importance. It had an important spiritual status. And when you look today in Jerusalem, you have the Mount of Olives, which is the most ancient Jewish cemetery. Why is it the dream of every Jew to be buried in the Mount of Olives? Because of the belief, the religious belief in the resurrection in the times of Messiah. And so people chose to be buried in Bethel because, eventually, and that's what I talk about in the DVD, because of Jacob's dream, because of the place where we see heaven touching earth, where we see a ladder that goes from earth to heaven with angels going up and down upon it. So this is a very, very important place. This is a very important story. And, the Bible, the stories in the Bible happened 3,000 years ago, 4,000 years ago. But it's also important to see how these stories affect us today. And we believe, just like God promised Jacob, at the worst time of his life, when he's running away from his brother who wants to kill him, when he is in a terrible situation, God is saying to Jacob, I will guard you, I will be with you, and I promise to return you back to this land, to your homeland. And today, as a Jew, seeing the amazing miracle of Jews gathering from all over the world and coming back to the land, God kept his promise not only to Jacob, but also to his descendants. And I'm so happy to be living in Israel. It's such a special time.
And you're listening to Aaron Lipkin of Lipkin Tours, who has made a special study of some of the amazing places in Israel you can visit. We've been talking about this particular DVD, Bethel, the Gate of Heaven. A second DVD has a little title up here called Finding Gilgal, The Footsteps of God. You also took us to a place called Argamon, I believe was the name of it, and it's over toward the River Jordan, about halfway up toward the Sea of Galilee, right? And if my geography doesn't fail me, but we were taken to a place, Gilgal. You see that word. I suppose all my life I've heard that word. I had no idea what it was or where it was or whether or not it could even be located. Tell us about this place where we went.
I think it's actually the most fascinating archaeological discoveries that was ever made in Israel that's connected to the Bible. As a kid, learning in a school in Jerusalem, I was told that the Bible is a fairy tale, that the stories there never happened, that they're all made up.
Wow.
And the reason why I was taught that in school is because at that time, during the 1980s, there wasn't enough proof from the biblical heartland to prove the stories of the Bible. For example, people thought that the Israelites did not come from Egypt, that they were one of the Canaanite nations that adopted a monotheistic religion believing in one God. And that was because there was no proof of a large entrance of Israelites into the land as depicted in the Bible. And Professor Adam Zertal, who spoke to the group, a non-believing secular archaeologist, decides to make a survey in the land. Again, under the impression that there was no Israelites, no Exodus, no Joshua, no Moses. And when he surveys the Jordan Valley, suddenly he finds so much proof of Israelite presence. You know, I saw a PowerPoint presentation that they did, and you see that before the time of the entrance, there was no settlement in the area of the Jordan River. And suddenly you see hundreds of sites, of Israelite sites, springing out for no reason, which shows clearly there was an entrance in one point of an enormous amount of people into the land. And so this is one fascinating thing that we found.
What amazed me is that we went to a place where there is a figure laid out on the ground that is 800-900 feet long, something like that, in the shape of a foot, with a square laid out in the middle of it, a little sort of recessed square. And the geography allows you to go up and look down at it, and you're seeing a footprint laid out. And this is what continues to boggle my mind, about 3,500 years ago, and it's still there.
Right.
How did it stay there for 3,500 years?
The area was not populated, so people did not ruin it. It just was left as it is. And Adam Zertal, finding places of residence of Israelites, also finds these weird-looking structures that were built by the Israelites, but he doesn't know for what reason. And these footprint structures, it's not just one or two, there are actually 6 footprint structures that were found by Professor Zertal. And he says, wait a second, what did they serve? Why did the Israelites go into so much trouble building a footprint-shaped structure? And the interesting thing is that Adam Zertal is saying, okay, I'm not going to leave it that way. I need to look at the most important resource in order to understand what this is. And he goes into the Bible and he reads in the Bible looking for some sort of hint as to what these structures are. And Zertal got to the conclusion that these are the ancient worshipping sites of the Israelites. And when we read in the Bible that Saul was crowned in the Gilgal, when we read that Joshua and the Israelites circumcised in the Gilgal, when whole offerings are being brought to Gilgal and sacrificed, Professor Zertal concluded that these footprint formations are the Gilgal that we read in the Bible. And today, when I stand in this footprint formation, I say, oh my God, this is where my forefathers stood in the early stages before entering the land into Bethel, into Shiloh. This is where they worshiped God. And the question is, why a footprint? Why?
That's the big question, of course. Why would you go to the trouble to make a 900-foot long sandal print, which is pretty well done, actually.
I think that when you read the book of Joshua, one of the most repetitive sentences is, wherever your foot wherever you will set your foot will be yours. And this footprint is the Israelites' way of saying, this is ours, but it's also God's. It's God's footprints. And this is why we gave that title.
The title here of the DVD, and you can see this yourself on the DVD, The Footsteps of God. You know, the Bible metaphorically says that the earth is God's footstool. It's where he rests his foot. And I can really see...
it's incredible.
Yeah, what
It's
Daniel
just
does,
incredible.
It's moving, isn't it, when you're
really,
there?
It really is. What is so cool to me is the Gilgal. I always thought, like you, I always thought it was a location. It's a town.
Right, a town.
But when
or
you read the
something.
context, wherever the word Gilgal falls out as you run through the Old Testament and you find the different places, you can tell from the context that they're not coming from or going to the same place. They're not in the same location. So Gilgal is not a town. It's a thing. It's not a place. It's a camp. It's a place where they gathered and they do these circumcisions. They do these festival events. And to go to the one that we went to at Argamon is absolutely stunning. It's beautiful. There's a natural stone amphitheater that you mentioned. Folks can get up on there and you can look down. It's bigger than a soccer field. And you can see it clearly. And I think now they're building a tower there, aren't they? So that visitors can actually get elevated and see it as well.
If you don't have a drone, it's
well, you would
hard
have to have
see.
a drone.
So, and you have a drone.
I do.
Now, in Hebrew, what does Gilgal mean exactly, or what's it close to?
Joshua, when naming the place of circumcision Gilgal, he says that it's to take out the badness or the insult of Egypt, of the Egyptian tradition, because the Israelites were not circumcised. But when you look at the etymology, at the word itself, it basically says something round. And in the DVD, I speak about the importance of this round, this circular shape that also repeats itself when we say in Hebrew, when we say Chag, which is a holiday. Chag is the Hebrew word of circling. And circling is a very important thing in the Jewish tradition and also in the temple.
Okay. So there's the idea of worshiping God with your feet, if you will, by going in a circle.
Well, that's what they did at Jericho, right?
Yeah,
they
right.
walked around Jericho and received the victory by orbiting, as it were.
And in Israel, today when we refer to the feasts, we call a feast in Hebrew literally foot, regel. And we don't know why, but now we understand.
Why would you call a feast a foot? But it's been, the reason's been lost in history, but now you know.
It's incredible.
And these things are coming to light now. I think we are living in very, very important prophetic times. I think Israel's back in the land for a reason. That God has put Israel back in the land, and things are going to happen. Exciting things. The Footsteps of God and The Gate of Heaven are the two DVDs we have described, and you can get them right in our Prophecy Watchers online bookstore. Just go to the online bookstore, click, and go down and look up Aaron Lipkin, and you're going to find these. Also, we have a third DVD, which we won't have time to talk about on today's program, but we will in a coming program, called The Forgotten Feast. What is the Forgotten Feast?
Well, it's a very, very special and mysterious event that happened in the Bible, and I go into explaining it in this DVD. The DVD that talks about ancient Shiloh, and we talk about the story of Samuel and where the tabernacle stood in that site, the place where Abraham spoke, where God spoke to Samuel, which is for me an amazing thing, and the importance of Shiloh to Messiah and to the return of Messiah.
There are just dozens of places, if not hundreds of places in Israel that speak of biblical history. It's not like your teachers taught you when you were young, right? That's good that you're doing this. 3 DVDs, by the way. If you want to get all 3 of them, just look on the online bookstore under the Hidden Israel package. And by the way, when you order these, $59.85 for all 3, we'll send you a free DVD. Join us in Jerusalem, March 2015, when we went over there and toured Israel with the help of Aaron. And every time you order anything, of course, from us, you get a copy of the Prophecy Watcher, our magazine. Always good articles, always good Bible studies in the magazine. Well, we've got a couple minutes to wrap up here, and I can't wait to talk about this 3rd DVD. Again, it's called Shiloh. In America, we call it Shiloh. You call it Shiloh. And what does that word mean? Well, that'll have to wait for another program. To conclude today, are you finding interesting things as you tour around Israel on your own? Things that you didn't know about?
All the time. And right by my house, just a half a year ago, there was an archaeological discovery of a very, very mysterious Israelite site. And I went to dig there for a week. And we just, on the first strike we got out, we unearthed a small idol that's from the Israelite period. I mean, Israel is just such an ancient place, and there's so many places to discover that we're doing these new discoveries all the time. So
now, on the way out, we've got about 1 minute left. I'd like to say that May 13th through 25th, 2017, there will be a tour to Israel. Daniel, tell us about that.
We're going again with Aaron's company. It's called the Scholars Insider Tour, and there's information available about that online at lipkintours.com. And we're looking forward to it. I wrote the itinerary, and part of the itinerary sees all of the usual things you'd expect to see in a Christian tour, but we're also going to go into the heartland and see some of these mysterious places.
Hidden sites.
Like Bethel. All right, that would be great. And so people can get connected with you in what way?
Lipkintours.com. There's a header right there, and it'll jump right out at you.
Aaron Lipkin, son of our good friend Avi Lipkin, and I really appreciate the way you look at what we call the Holy Land.
Thank
and
you.
We're going to have another long talk, so stay with us. We're going to make another broadcast. I'm Gary Stearman. You keep watching. We are. Thanks for joining us on Prophecy Watchers. You can find us on the web at prophecywatchers.com. In the meantime, keep watching, everybody.